Hey there, friend. Richie G's on the move again. Taking steps to clear the mind, leaving worries far behind, where every path feels like home, and you never walk alone. It's a welcome, open space, lit by kindness, filled with grace. Yeah, everybody get to know Jesus' name. Everybody gets to know Jesus' name.
So welcome to today's deep dive. When you picture a community that's built on, love, grace, and radical forgiveness, you naturally imagine open doors.
Right, like an endless supply of second chances.
Exactly. You think of a place where absolutely everyone is welcome, no matter what they've done or how many times they've messed up.
Yeah, we tend to view those spaces as, completely judgment-free zones. Unconditional acceptance is sort of the only rule.
But then, you dive into the historical texts that actually founded those ancient communities. We're looking at the biblical framework for accountability and church discipline today.
And you hit a massive, glaring paradox right away.
Yeah, you really do. Because in the exact same blueprint that preaches endless grace and loving your enemies, you find instructions telling believers to literally, and I quote, hand someone over to Satan.
Which is an incredibly jarring phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, it completely shatters our modern, comfortable assumption of what unconditional love is supposed to look like in practice.
Seriously, it sounds like a horror movie. So how do those two things exist in the same universe, let alone the same text? That's what our mission is today. We are unpacking this stack of historical and theological material for you, detailing this ancient framework for setting boundaries.
And what becomes clear very quickly when you read these sources is that this isn't, it's not a chaotic process at all.
Right. It's highly structured.
Very much so. When you look at the progression laid out in the text, you find a meticulously designed model. It is completely devoid of vengeance. The entire blueprint for handling unrepentant behavior among professing believers is actually, well, it's a rescue operation.
My rescue operation. I like that.
Yeah, because every single step is calibrated to heal, not to punish.
But before we get anywhere near the dramatic excommunications or handing people over to dark forces, this process doesn't start with a megaphone or a public trial.
No, not at all.
It apparently starts in absolute silence with a mirror.
Yeah, that is the crucial prerequisite here. The foundational texts for this framework insist that before you can even begin to address the dysfunction in someone else's life, you have to ruthlessly examine your own.
Right. You have to look inward first.
Exactly. There's a very famous teaching from Jesus in the Gospels, Matthew chapter 7, that forms the basis of this whole idea. It uses the imagery of a speck of sawdust and a massive wooden plank.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one. It's the idea of trying to pick a tiny piece of dust out of your friend's eye while ignoring a whole 2x4 sticking out of your own face.
Yeah, and it is brilliant, intentional physical comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus is painting this absurd picture of someone stumbling around a village with a structural roof beam protruding from their face, knocking over furniture, while earnestly trying to perform delicate eye surgery on their neighbor.
That's such a funny visual.
It really highlights the sheer blindness of hypocrisy,
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because trying to discipline someone else while ignoring your own massive issues is, well, it's like trying to give parallel parking advice from the driver's seat of a car you just crashed into a fire hydrant.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, to put it in medical terms, it's like a surgeon trying to operate on a patient while wearing muddy gloves. You aren't going to heal the patient, you are just going to cause a massive life-threatening infection.
Exactly. You have to take the gloves off, wash your hands, and get your own vision clear first. The psychological insight there is profound. Human tendency is to deflect. We desperately want to fix the glaring flaws in the people around us because, well, it means we don't have to look at our own failures.
Right, it's a distraction technique.
Yeah. The text demands we halt that instinct entirely. Self-examination just has to come first.
But hang on, let me push back on this a little bit because my immediate thought is, isn't this the ultimate loophole?
How do you mean?
Well, none of us are perfect, right? We all have flaws. So if I have to wait until my hands are flawlessly, perfectly sterilized before I can address a toxic behavior in my friend, I'm just never going to say anything.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I can just use the plank in my eye as a really convenient excuse to avoid incredibly uncomfortable conversations.
Well,
So how clean do the gloves actually have to be?
that is a very real tension. And honestly, it's a common misunderstanding of the text. The goal here isn't to achieve flawless, sinless perfection before you are allowed to speak up.
Because that would be impossible.
Exactly. If that were the standard, accountability simply wouldn't exist anywhere in human history. Instead, the framework is about approaching the situation with a clean conscience through immediate confession.
Okay, so it's more about self-awareness than perfection.
Yes, very much so. When you look at the broader biblical material we're pulling from, like the letters of John or the Psalms, there's a heavy emphasis on the sheer misery of hiding your own failures.
Oh, yeah, guilt is exhausting.
It really is. Like Psalm 32 describes a person whose bones feel like they are wasting away because they are keeping silent about their own guilt. And the letter to the Hebrews warns that unconfessed sin actually hardens the human heart through deceitfulness.
Wow. I can see how that works mechanically, though. I mean, if I am secretly harboring guilt about my own actions, I usually become incredibly defensive.
Right, you get irritable.
Yeah, exactly. I lose my empathy completely. If my heart is hardened by my own defensiveness, I am physically and emotionally incapable of confronting someone else with any kind of gentleness. I'm just going to attack them to make myself feel superior.
And that is the exact mechanism the text is trying to prevent. The goal of removing the plank isn't to put yourself on a pedestal of moral superiority. It's to place you on level ground.
So you're approaching them as an equal.
Yes, you are acknowledging your own desperate need for grace before you attempt to offer it to someone else. It ensures the spirit of the confrontation is profoundly humble rather than, judgmental.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say my gloves are clean. I've done the self-reflection. How does the actual confrontation happen?
Right, the practical part.
Yeah, because we have to move from this quiet internal self-examination to the actual messy reality of dealing with another human being.
This brings us to the operational core of the framework, which is found in Matthew chapter 18. It outlines a progressive ladder of accountability. And I have to say, it is incredibly countercultural.
I really want to walk through the rungs of that ladder. Because looking at the sources, step one is just a private, gentle confrontation. Just the two of you in a room.
Which is, ironically, the step we almost always want to skip today.
Oh, totally.
When someone hurts us, or we see them acting destructively, our modern impulse is to seek a coalition. We want validation, so we go to 3 other friends and say, can you believe what so-and-so did?
Yeah, we disguise it as venting.
Exactly. We disguise it as venting, but really, we are building a case. The text explicitly forbids that. It demands you bypass your need for validation and go straight to the person privately.
And if you've ever watched a workplace turn toxic, or a tight-knit friend group completely implode because someone immediately posted a screenshot to a group chat instead of having a private conversation, well, you know exactly why step one has to be private.
Yeah, the damage is irreversible once it's public.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting to me. This is entirely contrary to modern cancel culture. Cancel culture demands we take the worst moment of someone's life, broadcast it to thousands of strangers, and demand their immediate, permanent ruin.
It's completely opposite.
Yeah, this framework demands you keep the circle as agonizingly small as possible for as long as possible.
And that contrast is vital for you to understand this deep dive. Cancel culture seeks to discard the individual to protect the group's ideological purity. The biblical model seeks to protect the group's purity by redeeming the individual.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. And the crucial off-ramp in this first step is that if the person listens and recognizes their error, the process is completely over. Fellowship is restored immediately. No one else ever needs to know.
But what if they don't listen? I mean, what if they dig their heels in, get defensive, and absolutely refuse to change?
Then the ladder goes up a rung. Step 2 is to return, but this time you bring 1 or 2 witnesses with you.
Okay, see, that sounds like it could feel like a gang up. Why witnesses?
I get why it sounds that way, but it's not meant for intimidation. In the historical context of Jewish law, which this text is heavily drawing from, witnesses were required to establish objective facts.
Ah, so it's about neutrality.
Yes, they protect both parties. They protect the accused from hearsay or misunderstanding or a personal vendetta, and they provide a sober, neutral perspective to confirm if destructive, unrepentant behavior is genuinely occurring. They break the whole he said, she said stalemate.
Okay, so you have neutral parties verify that, yes, this person is actively destroying their life or hurting others, and they refuse to stop. What is step 3?
If they still refuse to listen, the instruction is to tell it to the church. In practical terms, historical application usually meant bringing the issue to the recognized leadership or elders first, and then to the wider community.
So the circle finally widens.
It does, but notice how much patience is built into the system. It took 3 distinct phases to get here. At this point, the issue moves from private accountability to corporate discipline.
Right.
The weight of the entire believing community is brought to bear, essentially pleading with the individual to turn around.
And if they still, after all of that patience, look the entire community in the face and say, no, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Then we reach step 4. The text says to treat them as a pagan or a tax collector, which means removing them from the intimate fellowship of the believing community.
Okay, treating someone as a tax collector doesn't really carry the same weight today as it did back then. I mean, nobody likes the IRS, but we don't excommunicate them.
Right.
So what did that actually mean to a first-century audience?
To understand the weight of that phrase, you really have to look at the historical context of Roman-occupied Judea. Tax collectors weren't just bureaucrats doing a job.
What were they?
They were Jewish citizens who had essentially bought a franchise from the oppressive Roman Empire to extort their own neighbors. They were viewed as ultimate betrayers, insiders who had sold out their own people for personal gain.
Wow, and pagans.
Pagans were simply outsiders who didn't follow the God of Israel.
So treating them as a pagan or tax collector means you stop treating them as a trusted insider. You shift the relationship entirely.
Precisely. You stop treating them as a brother or sister in the faith, and you start treating them as someone on the outside who needs to be evangelized. Now, there is a very important distinction to make here about who this entire ladder applies to.
Okay, what's the distinction?
The texts are abundantly clear that this process is exclusively for professing believers.
Oh, so people inside the house.
Yes, exactly. It is for people who claim the identity of a believer, who have agreed to the rules of the house, but are persistently living contrary to them, engaging in unrepentant greed, slander, or exploitation.
So it doesn't apply to the outside world.
No, it does not apply to the outside world. The early church was actually called to engage redemptively and lovingly with unbelievers. They weren't trying to police the morals of the Roman Empire. They were just trying to maintain the integrity of their own community.
That makes sense. Are there any exceptions to this step-by-step ladder, though? Like, do you always have to start privately?
There is one notable exception, and it's found in a letter to a young leader named Timothy. When it comes to recognized leaders or elders in the community who persist in sin, the private steps are completely bypassed.
Wait, really?
Well,
why do leaders get a different set of rules?
Because a leader's influence is inherently public, so their accountability must be public. The text requires 2 or 3 witnesses to even bring an accusation.
Which I assume protects leaders from frivolous, baseless attacks.
Exactly. But if the destructive behavior is confirmed by those witnesses, the rebuke is entirely public. It happens, quote, in the presence of all.
Wow, no private, gentle conversation first.
No. Respecting leadership doesn't mean covering up their failures. Public rebuke protects the vulnerable flock and instills a healthy, sobering reverence for the immense weight of leadership.
That is intense. Okay, let's go back to that final step of the ladder for the everyday person. We mentioned treating them as an outsider, but there is another layer to this in the historical text that we brought up at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Right, the 1 Corinthians passage.
Yeah. What happens when someone is officially removed from the community? Because this is where we transition to that letter written by the Apostle Paul to a highly dysfunctional church in the ancient city of Corinth.
And this is where we encounter that shocking instruction to hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh.
Yes. Every time I read that, it genuinely sounds like a line from a horror movie. It sounds like the church is performing a curse or casting some kind of dark ritual to physically harm the person.
It carries a tremendous amount of gravity, I agree. But we have to decode the theological worldview behind it. It is not a curse.
Okay, good to know.
And it emphatically does not mean the person has permanently lost their salvation or that the church is inflicting physical torture.
Then what does it actually mean mechanically? Like, how do you hand someone over?
Well, you have to understand how the early Christians viewed the church. They saw it as a spiritual sanctuary. It was an umbrella of protection, encouragement, prayer, and grace in a world they believed was hostile and under the influence of dark spiritual forces.
So it's a safe zone.
Right. To expel someone from that fellowship, to push them outside the walls of the city, is simply to remove them from that protective covering. You are placing them back into the world, which Scripture describes as being under Satan's domain.
I see. And the phrase destruction of the flesh, what about that?
It refers to the natural, painful consequences of their own choices. It means allowing them to experience the relational, emotional, financial, or circumstantial wreckage that their toxic behavior naturally produces.
Without the church constantly stepping in to soften the blow.
Exactly.
You know, when I think about how this translates to modern life, it sounds exactly like the concept of hitting rock bottom in addiction recovery.
That's a really good comparison.
Yeah, because if you have a loved one who is actively destroying themselves with addiction, and you keep paying their rent, calling in sick for them at work, bailing them out of jail, and covering up their mistakes, well, you aren't actually saving them.
No, you're just enabling the disease.
Right, you become a shock absorber for their bad choices.
That is a highly accurate psychological parallel. As long as you're absorbing the consequences, they have absolutely no incentive to change.
Right. Sometimes the most agonizingly loving thing you can do is to step back, stop shielding them, and let them hit the pavement. You have to let them feel the full weight of their actions, hoping the sheer shock of the impact wakes them up before it kills them.
And that is the ultimate act of tough love. Paul explicitly states the primary purpose of this severe action in the text. He says, so that his spirit may be saved.
Wow, so the goal is still entirely redemptive.
Yes. It serves a dual purpose, actually. First, it protects the wider community from the behavior spreading. The text uses the metaphor of leaven, or yeast.
How does the yeast metaphor work in this context?
Think about baking bread.
Hmm.
You only need a microscopic amount of yeast, and if you leave it alone, it silently works its way through the entire batch of dough, fundamentally changing its chemistry.
Oh, I see.
Unchecked, toxic behavior operates the exact same way in a community. If someone is openly exploiting others and the community does nothing, it normalizes the behavior. It silently infects the culture until the entire group is compromised.
So excommunication protects the dough from the yeast.
Yes, it protects the innocent while simultaneously and prayerfully hoping that the severe pain of isolation jolts the individual out of their delusion. It is a desperate measure taken for their eternal good.
That's fascinating.
And what is really fascinating is that we actually have a recorded instance where this exact method worked.
Wait, really? Did it actually play out the way it was designed to?
It did. In a follow-up letter to that same church in Corinth, we see the aftermath. The extreme isolation achieved its purpose. The person experienced the full weight of the discipline, the shock woke them up, and they repented.
Oh, wow.
And Paul immediately pivots and urges the church to forgive and comfort him. He tells them to warmly welcome him back inside the walls so he isn't swallowed up by excessive sorrow.
So the door was always unlocked from the inside, basically, just waiting for him to turn around.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say the tough love works. They hit rock bottom, the shock wakes them up, and they're standing back at the door wanting to come in. Does the community just flip a switch and say, cool, you're back in, let's forget this ever happened?
Not at all. And this moves us from the severing of fellowship to the incredibly delicate art of putting things back together.
Which has to be hard.
Very hard. There's a specific instruction found in the letter to the Galatians that provides the heartbeat for the aftermath of discipline. It says, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently.
The phrase caught in a sin feels very specific to me. It doesn't sound like someone who is shaking their fist in defiant rebellion. It sounds like someone who tripped.
That's a great observation. The language implies being entangled or surprised by a snare. This is the person who has realized the massive mess they are in. And the instruction for the mature people in the community is to restore them. The original Greek word used here is katartizo.
Katartizi. What does that word actually mean in practice?
It's a beautifully rich term. In the ancient world, it was used to describe fishermen mending torn nets. Think about the tedious, careful hours a fisherman spends untangling cords, weaving new threads, and securing knots so the net can hold weight again.
That's a great image.
It gets better. Katartisis was also a common medical term. It was used by physicians to describe the process of setting a broken bone back into its proper alignment.
Setting a broken bone is an incredible analogy for this, because if you've ever broken a bone or watched someone have a bone set, you know it is excruciatingly painful.
Oh, incredibly painful.
Yeah, the doctor has to physically manipulate the fractured, jagged pieces, sometimes applying a lot of force to get them to align properly. But if the doctor doesn't do it, if they just leave it alone because they are afraid of causing the patient temporary pain, the bone heals crooked.
Exactly. It becomes permanently deformed. It loses its strength and its function.
Right. So the community has to be willing to bear the pain of the person's restoration. The confrontation, the discipline, the difficult conversations, that is the setting of the bone. It hurts in the moment, but it's the only way to heal straight.
That captures the essence of katartizu perfectly.
Yeah.
It is skillful, careful healing. It is not about crushing the person who failed. It is about helping them become whole, structurally sound human beings again.
And notice the text demands this must be done gently.
Yes, and gentleness isn't weakness. It is immense strength under tight control. A surgeon uses immense force to set a bone, but they do it with absolute precision and care.
It really shows that deep structural accountability and profound life-changing grace aren't opposites at all. They actually require each other to work.
They really do.
Yeah, because without accountability, grace is just enabling. It's just paying the rent for the addict. And without grace, accountability is just an execution.
Absolutely. When you execute this blueprint correctly, from the first quiet look in the mirror to the private whispers, all the way to the severe boundary setting, every single step is driven by the desire to mend the net.
Ending the net, yeah.
It honors the community's safety, it protects the vulnerable, and it actively seeks the wandering sheep to bring them home.
You know, if you are trying to figure out how healthy communities maintain their boundaries without losing their humanity, this ancient framework is honestly a masterclass in conflict resolution.
It truly is.
It provides a meticulous progression that protects the purity of the group without ever discarding the inherent value of the individual who failed. It is tough love in its purest, most potent form.
But it requires an incredible amount of maturity. It demands self-reflection first, relentless patience during the escalation, absolute firmness when boundaries are crossed, and overwhelming gentleness in the aftermath.
It's a lot to ask of people. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Something for you to mull over that isn't explicitly mapped out in the step-by-step procedures we just walked through.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we've spent all this time looking at the careful, agonizing process of confronting and eventually restoring the person who committed the wrong. We see the community rallying to set their broken bone, but what about the collateral damage?
Ah, the ripple effects.
Exactly. When that repentant person finally comes back through the doors and the community celebrates their return, how does a community simultaneously heal the profound trust that was broken with the victims of that original behavior?
That is the complex, messy reality of human relationships, isn't it? Restoration doesn't just magically erase consequence or the trauma inflicted on others.
It really doesn't. How do you mend the net for the people who are caught in the tear watching the person who hurt them be welcomed back? It's a massive, difficult question.
A very necessary one to ask, though.
Definitely. And it's one worth exploring as you continue to study how real, vibrant communities function in the real world. Keep asking the hard questions as you explore these ideas. And remember, before you try to operate on someone else's life, make sure you take a long look in the mirror and wash the mud off your own gloves. We'll catch you next time.
If a brother falls to shadows in the night, we who walk in spirit lead them to the light. Search our hearts, Lord, move the plank away, help us reach in love and show them your way. Not in pride, but meekness as our guide. In your grace, let mercy now abide. Restore us gently, Lord, mend the broken net again. Set the bone, bring your healing to the end. gently, Lord. Speak a word in secret, let the love be known. If the heart is cold, we do not stand alone. Not as enemies, but family we warn, till the morning breaks and the soul is reborn. Search our hearts before we speak. Find the pride that makes us weak. Bear the load, let the burden